But what if you want to use Preact with ReScript? It can be done. I'll show you how, and here we go. So I scaffolded a create ReScript app, chose the Vite template, and now we're just first going to strip React itself. So we're just going to remove React, React DOM, ReScript React, and the plugin. Next, we're going to install Preact and the Preact Vite plugin. Then we go to our ReScript JSON, replace the React plugin with the Preact plugin. And let's just do a ReScript compile. This is not going to work. And let's just fix all that. So in our ReScript JSON, what we want to do, we no longer have this dependency. And in the JSX section, you want to put in module React. Now this doesn't exist yet. We'll create this in a later stage. But if I now compile, it says exactly that. And I'll first try to explain what this module section does. If you take a look at this button file, you'll see that it has JSX syntax. In a previous video, I talked about how a PPX is meant to transform the syntax into something that eventually does calls to the React runtime. In this case, it needs to do calls to the Preact runtime. So let's first check out what actually happens under the hood. We can call the compiler, only ask it to parse, pass in that PPX transformation, our module Preact flag, and then just reprint what happens. And you'll see it's going to transform this file, this JSX button. It is going to make a Preact elements JSX with a string of button and some props. And that's why we need a Preact module. Now, we don't have that yet, so we'll need to create that. And unfortunately, there's no easy npm install ReScript Preact binding, but we can easily fix that ourselves. So I'll need to add a Preact.rescript file. If I now try and compile again, we should get one step further. And it says that, okay, Preact elements doesn't exist. Well, of course, it's an empty file. Nothing exists in Preact, but Preact itself now exists. What we want to do is go to the ReScript documentation. There's a section JSX, which talks about generic JSX transform. And if we scroll down here, it more or less explains what the transformation needs to do. And then there's an example Preact res. If we just copy that to our clipboard, go back to our source, paste it in, try and recompile, getting there. So we have a different bug because this is only an outline of what needs to happen for the transformation. So if we scroll up again and see we need a Preact elements, well, we have a Preact over here. We have a module elements. It has this JSX and it's calling the Preact runtime. So that will work out fine, but we don't have necessarily all the bindings that we're still after. So in case of app, I'm using a React use state. I no longer have the React module, so I'll do a Preact, but my Preact file doesn't have use state. So I'll just add in a binding for use state. This is the drawback when you want to use Preact. It can work, but you're a little bit on your own when it comes to the bindings. There's no community project so far. If there's interest for that, do definitely let people know. Something might spark out of this, but for now, we're just gonna add the use state over here. Then our app now has Preact use state. If I were to compile again, it just leads us to the next error. Now React string doesn't exist. In case of React string, you can just do a little search and replace. There we go. And if you really want to have that bad React taste out of your mouth, then you can also swap the attributes, React component with props to JSX.components. These are doing exactly the same. You've really totally let go of all things React. Okay, next problem is in main.res. We don't have React DOM, so again, this is a binding problem. What's happening here is that we're using a query selector helper from the React DOM bindings. We're doing the create root, which is how you would do it in React. We're even using the strict mode, but that's also a React tailored component. So what we want to do here is bring in some other binding. Why am I adding this in this main file? Personal preference, really. Could add this to Preact, but I'm actually only going to use this in one place in my application, so I'm just going with render here. But basically for Preact, you need a render, you then need to pass in a component and a DOM element. The DOM elements, we're just grabbing something that works for our bindings. This is just a type. I chose something by default. Could have specified anything else really. This is just like, this gives an option of an element and this takes an element. So then we have the render call. And at this point, our compilation works. So what we can do now is to launch Vite. we can see in our browser, in our DevTools, that Preact picked it up. We can click the counter as we were to expect. As far as I can tell, Preact is working. I never really used Preact, so I can't really tell much more here. But there's one little thing I want to wrap up. Preact picked this up, but they do seem to recommend you to add like an import statement at the very top for the DevTools to work. So the doc spoke of this import Preact debug to have that as your first entry file. So when we go to main MJS, we see that it's over here, but it should actually even be earlier than that. So it really needs to be the first thing. This is where this raw is not going to work for us. So what we can do here is slide in a directive. The add directive will ensure that this is going to be the absolute first line. And that seems to help for Preact debug tools. So that's something to be mindful of. And all the rest is really as you more or less expected. So we're using Preact, we're importing it. We are calling the render function over here. When we take a look at our app, what that compiled code is, we have a JSX runtime and it's now coming from Preact JSX. And why is that happening? Well, because all these things are defined like that. And we specified in our ReScript JSON that we wanted to use our own module instead of defaulting to React. And that's it for today. Short and sweet, how I like it. This was suggested by one of the comments, so I do very much appreciate everybody watching these videos and liking, sharing, putting comments. If there's anything else you want to see ReScript related, let me know, and who knows, might turn it into a video. That's it for now, until we meet again.